The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting a golden glow across the dusty Marine Corps training range. It was supposed to be a routine morning, another marksmanship session designed to hone the skills of the platoon, but from the very first shots, it became apparent that nothing would go as planned. Bullets pinged and ricocheted off the steel targets, some hitting dangerously off to the sides. Each miss seemed louder than the last, echoing across the range and feeding the growing frustration of the instructors. Lieutenant Harris rubbed his temples and muttered under his breath, How are they all missing? It's just standing still and aiming." He glanced at the target board, noting the haphazard cluster of holes. Some were barely scraping the edges of the scoring rings, while a few had missed entirely, thudding into the dirt behind. The Marines, a group of young and experienced men alike, stared at their rifles with incredulity, flipping cartridges and adjusting sights, trying in vain to find a reason for the catastrophe. Private First Class Donovan swore under his breath. He had been training for months to perfect his aim, but somehow today his shots flew like drunken sparrows. Each misfire seemed to sap more confidence from the platoon. Around him, fellow Marines were muttering complaints about wind, rifles, even the sun reflecting off the metal targets. Some accused each other of carelessness. A few simply hung their heads, too embarrassed to speak. Observing from the sidelines, Sergeant Alina Burke leaned against the fence, arms folded. Her keen eyes scanned the scene with quiet intensity. She wasn't new to training mishaps or the occasional embarrassing session, but this level of ineptitude was rare, even for a platoon of freshly minted recruits. She noticed subtle errors, a grip too tight on the rifle, shoulders hunched, eyes squinting unnecessarily, breaths held at the wrong moment. Each small mistake compounded the inaccuracy, and yet the Marines didn't even seem aware of it. Alina didn't speak. Not yet. There was no need. The chaos unfolding before her was instructive enough. If anyone could spot the problem, it was her. Years of experience had honed her observation skills. She understood the small, almost imperceptible details that separated a mediocre shooter from a master marksman. Every twitch, every micro-adjustment, and every lapse in concentration told a story about the shooter. And today, the story being written was one of failure. Corporal Jenkins, one of the more senior Marines in the group, slammed his fist against the rifle rack. "This is ridiculous. We've trained for weeks. How can we all be missing like this?" His voice carried frustration and disbelief. Around him, the rest of the platoon shared similar sentiments, some defensive, others resigned to their incompetence. Even the instructors were beginning to lose patience. Sergeant Major Thompson barked orders, his voice roughened by frustration. "Adjust your stance. Relax your grip. Don't let the wind shake you." But each shouted command seemed only to escalate the tension. The Marines were nervous, flustered, and their shots reflected every ounce of doubt coursing through their bodies. Amidst the chaos, Alina observed silently, taking mental notes. She watched as Private Mitchell struggled to align his sights, repeatedly raising the rifle too high and sending shots flying harmlessly over the target. She noted how Corporal Simmons' elbows flared out, destabilizing his posture. Even the seasoned Marines were faltering, caught in a wave of collective panic. The range, once orderly, had become a cacophony of failure. Ricocheting bullets, muttered curses, and frustrated sighs forming an almost tangible tension in the air. Despite the mess, Alina's calm presence was noticeable. She didn't fidget, didn't mutter, and didn't scowl. She merely watched, assessing, understanding, and silently preparing for the moment she would intervene. Experience had taught her that panic was contagious. If she spoke too soon, corrected too early, or revealed too much knowledge prematurely, it could backfire. The Marines needed to realize the chaos themselves, to feel the failure before they could appreciate the lesson. Lt. Harris walked up to her, exasperated. "Sergeant Burke, can you, I don't know, see what's going on? Everyone's missing. Everyone." Alina's gaze didn't leave the target board. She finally nodded, her voice calm and steady. "I see it, sir, but they're not aware of the mistakes they're making yet. Let them finish this round." Harris frowned, his confusion apparent. Let them, sir, they're failing spectacularly. Alina shrugged slightly, an almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Sometimes, failure teaches more than success ever could. Across the line of Marines, tension mounted further. Some were muttering under their breaths. Others were cursing the wind. Every misfire chipped away at confidence, but also, unbeknownst to them, set the stage for something extraordinary. They didn't notice the quiet figure of Alina at the edge of the range, observing every detail, preparing for the perfect moment to show them what mastery looked like. By the midpoint of the morning, frustration had reached a crescendo. Sergeant Major Thompson slammed a clipboard against the table. If we can't get a single clean shot, maybe this entire session is pointless. His words were sharp, a warning, but they only heightened the chaos. Some Marines visibly shook their heads, defeated. Others kept shooting, hoping sheer repetition might eventually yield a hit. Alina finally stepped closer to the line, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Marines glanced at her, curious but unsure what to expect. She moved with a quiet confidence that drew attention. No one knew her next move, but everyone could feel the presence of someone who commanded respect without raising a voice. Her eyes scanned the rifles, the stances, and the trembling hands of her platoon. She noted the slightest errors, the way Private Donovan's shoulders hunched, the way Corporal Jenkins' elbows flared, the way several Marines failed to time their breathing with the squeeze of the trigger. For a moment, the noise and tension of the range seemed to fade. Alina's mind focused entirely on what needed to be done. She would not only demonstrate perfect marksmanship, but also teach a lesson in discipline, patience, and focus, a lesson the Marines would remember for the rest of their careers. The stage was set. The platoon was floundering, morale was at a low point, and failure was evident. But as Alina Burke prepared silently at the edge of the range, the air seemed charged with anticipation. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and though no one realized it yet, the chaos of the morning would soon be replaced by a demonstration of absolute skill, a demonstration that would earn the whispered, awed repetition of one phrase for years to come. "Hand me that rifle." The morning heat intensified, baking the gravel underfoot as the platoon continued to struggle. The sound of misfired rounds echoed like a chaotic percussion, each bullet striking metal or earth with a clang that seemed to mock the Marines' efforts. Sergeant Major Thompson's patience was fraying, and the young recruits' faces showed a mix of embarrassment and desperation. Even seasoned members who prided themselves on their composure were twitching with frustration, adjusting their grips in vain. Amidst the chaos, Sergeant Alina Burke stood apart, calm as a still lake, her arms folded and eyes scanning every detail with meticulous precision. Alina's gaze moved systematically across the line of shooters. Private Donovan's hands shook slightly as he gripped his rifle too tightly, sending his shots arcing wildly off target. His stance was uneven, one shoulder hiked, the other dropped. Breath control was non-existent, and he squeezed the trigger at the worst possible moment. Beside him, Corporal Simmons had a better stance but flinched at every shot, tilting his head, misaligning the sight and cursing the recoil. It wasn't the weapons, it wasn't the wind, and it certainly wasn't luck. This was error compounded by panic. The other Marines were no better. Some hunched over their rifles, eyes squinting through sights, ignoring the subtle cues their instructors had drilled into them for months. Others gripped the triggers like lifelines, tightening their knuckles until the metal frame cut into their skin. Each misfire seemed to build tension like a rising storm, the frustration spreading from one Marine to another. Murmurs turned into whispered complaints into muttered curses, and muttered curses into frustrated groans. The range was alive with failure. Alina did not flinch, nor did she intervene yet. Instead, she walked slowly along the line, careful to maintain enough distance so that the Marines did not feel the weight of her scrutiny. Her eyes were sharp, catching every detail. The slight angle of a rifle, the premature squeeze of a trigger, the tiniest tremor in a hand. She noticed the subtle mistakes that compounded with every shot. Every Marine had potential, she knew, but without guidance, that potential was wasted. She made mental notes of who struggled most and where the errors were most severe. Private Mitchell's frustration boiled over, his voice cracking as he muttered to himself, "Why can't I hit anything? I've done this 100 times." He lowered his rifle for a moment, shaking his head and adjusting his stance again. Alina watched patiently, knowing that rushing to correct him would do little. The lesson, she understood, needed to come naturally, through observation and realization. Her presence alone, calm and unwavering, began to exert a subtle influence. The Marines, without knowing it, felt a quiet tension in her gaze, a sense that someone was seeing every mistake and would, in due course, reveal the path to mastery. Nearby, Corporal Jenkins stomped his boot into the gravel, muttering about wasted effort and misfiring rifles. His anger was palpable, and it began to spread like wildfire across the platoon. Young Marines, already jittery from their failures, mimicked the tension. One by one, nervous habits worsened. Shots were fired prematurely, grips loosened, and stances faltered further. It was a chain reaction of chaos, and Alina watched every link with detached precision. Even the instructors were struggling to maintain order. Sergeant Major Thompson barked out corrections, his voice harsh and urgent. "Relax your shoulders, focus your sight, don't hold your breath too long." Yet every shouted command seemed only to amplify the chaos. Marines flinched at his voice, their shots trembling with uncertainty. The scene was almost comical if it weren't so painfully frustrating, a battalion of skilled soldiers undone by nerves and self-doubt. Alina shifted slightly, her gaze resting on a young recruit named Private Alvarez. He had been visibly shaking since the first round, and every shot he fired drifted far off target. She noted the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders, and the way his eyes darted nervously from target to target. She could see that he wanted to succeed desperately, but the weight of expectation crushed his ability to perform. A gentle guiding hand, she knew, would make all the difference, but not yet. As the morning progressed, a rhythm of chaos settled over the range. Missed shots, muttered curses, and frustrated groans created an almost musical pattern of failure. Alina didn't step in. She observed, silent and unwavering. Her mind worked rapidly, cataloging errors and successes, imagining exactly how she would correct each Marine. She knew the lesson would be memorable, not through force, but through demonstration. Every misfire now was a setup for the revelation she planned to deliver. Even the most experienced Marines were not immune. Corporal Simmons cursed his trembling hand and repeated shots that missed by inches. His frustration mirrored the platoon's collective sentiment, a mixture of disbelief and helplessness. Alina noted how the tension created a cycle of failure. One misfire led to another, compounding errors with every round fired. She smiled ever so slightly. She knew the moment when everything would shift from chaos to precision was approaching. A few younger recruits began to whisper among themselves, questioning their own abilities. "I don't understand, am I doing something wrong?" one asked nervously. The line was thick with fear of failure. Alina listened silently, noting how self-doubt spread like wildfire in a group untrained to manage their nerves. The lesson she planned would extend beyond marksmanship. It would teach focus, confidence, and the quiet discipline required for mastery. Finally, the instructors decided to pause the session. Sergeant Major Thompson pounded his fist against the table. "We're wasting time. Nobody is hitting anything." He turned to Alina, frustration evident in his voice. "Burke, what do you think? Can you see what's going wrong?" Alina's eyes moved slowly across the field, finally resting on the scattered targets. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Yes, sir. I see everything. The problem isn't the rifles or the wind. The problem is that they're not aware of how to control their bodies, their breathing, and their focus simultaneously. Once they understand these things, everything changes." Harris frowned, confused. "Let them. They're failing so badly. How can letting them continue help?" Alina shrugged slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Because the failure is part of the lesson. They need to experience it, to feel the chaos before they can appreciate precision. Once the moment comes, the lesson will be unforgettable." The instructors exchanged glances, unsure but trusting Alina's judgment. Meanwhile, the platoon shifted uneasily, some realizing that the chaos they were enduring was being watched by someone who had clearly mastered the skill they sought to achieve. Alina's quiet confidence and observation set a new tension across the range, one filled not with fear, but with anticipation. Unseen by the Marines, she prepared herself. In her mind, she visualized perfect shots, every bullet striking the center of the target. She felt the weight of the rifle in her hands, imagined the perfect stance, the controlled breathing, the measured squeeze of the trigger. Each misfire by the platoon only strengthened her focus. Soon, she would step forward, take control, and demonstrate what mastery looked like. A display so precise it would remain etched in the memory of everyone present. The stage was set. The platoon floundered, frustration and self-doubt thick in the air, unaware that a moment of brilliance was approaching. Alina Burke, calm and unshakable, waited silently at the edge of the range, ready to turn the morning's chaos into a lesson that would be remembered long after the last shot had been fired. The sun had climbed higher, baking the training range under a clear, relentless sky. The sound of bullets clanging off targets had become a rhythm of chaos, a symphony of frustration and missed opportunity. The Marines were scattered along the line, their rifles trembling in their hands as if they carried the weight of the morning's failures. Some were muttering under their breath, some were glaring at targets in disbelief, and others simply hung their heads, overcome with embarrassment. No one seemed able to regain control, and morale was sinking rapidly. Amid the chaos, Sergeant Alina Burke moved quietly along the edge of the range, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. She noticed subtle mistakes in posture, in grip, in the timing of breaths and squeezes. She cataloged every error in her mind, knowing that each misfire was both a lesson and an opportunity. While the platoon struggled in visible panic, Alina's mind was calm, calculating, and precise. She saw what they couldn't, that the problems were entirely fixable with proper guidance and demonstration. Then came a moment that would alter the course of the morning. Corporal Jenkins, a man known for his short temper and loud voice, slammed his fist against the rifle rack, startling nearby Marines. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "We've trained for weeks for this. How can anyone miss every single shot?" His voice cracked with frustration, and for a moment the collective tension of the platoon seemed to coalesce around him. A nervous laughter rippled through the younger recruits, and one of them, trying to lighten the mood, muttered, "Maybe someone else should try. Maybe Burke could do better than all of us." The words hung in the air, more provocative than humorous. All eyes flicked toward Alina. She had been watching silently, a calm presence in the middle of chaos, and now every Marine in the line felt the weight of their suggestion. Alina's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She said nothing immediately, letting the words settle like a challenge in the minds of everyone present. The instructors exchanged uneasy glances. Lieutenant Harris whispered to Sergeant Major Thompson, "Do you think she?" Sergeant Major Thompson shook his head, skeptical. "She might, but the platoon's ego will make it messy. Let's see what happens." Alina, ignoring the whispers, stepped forward deliberately. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and confident. Her boots crunched against the gravel, drawing subtle attention from the platoon. The Marines shifted uneasily, some skeptical, some curious. Nobody knew exactly what she intended, and the uncertainty filled the air with tension. Private Donovan, still struggling with his shaky hands, whispered to a fellow Marine, "Is she really going to shoot? I don't know, she's calm. Too calm, that's unnerving." Alina approached the rifle rack, glancing at the weapons arrayed before her. Each one had been used by a Marine whose focus had crumbled under pressure. The rifles looked ordinary, unremarkable, and yet she could see the subtle differences in each one. The balance, the trigger pull, the slight wear from constant handling. She reached for a standard-issue rifle, the one closest to her, and lifted it with the precision of someone who had handled countless weapons in countless conditions. The platoon watched, some whispering in disbelief, others openly staring. The mood had shifted. The earlier frustration had morphed into curiosity and a hint of awe. Nobody had expected this silent, measured figure at the edge of the range to step into the chaos, but here she was, calm and unflinching. She turned to the instructors briefly, her voice measured but carrying authority. "May I demonstrate proper technique?" Lieutenant Harris, still uneasy, nodded. "Go ahead, Sergeant Burke, show them." The line of Marines tensed. Some rolled their eyes, thinking it would be a minor display, a few lucky hits at best. Others, however, leaned forward, eager to see what mastery looked like. Alina didn't speak further. She didn't need to. Every step she took toward the firing line was deliberate, every movement confident. The tension was electric. She knelt briefly, adjusting the sling of the rifle across her shoulder, checking her stance with military precision. She exhaled slowly, allowing her mind and body to align. Her breathing was steady, her focus singular. She visualized the shots before firing them, imagining each one landing precisely in the center of the target. This was not luck. It was preparation, discipline, and experience distilled into action. A few Marines whispered nervously among themselves. Private Alvarez nudged Donovan. "Do you think she can really do it?" he asked, eyes wide. Donovan shook his head, unsure. "If anyone can, it's Burke, but it's like she's in a different world." Alina's presence, calm and unshakable, began to exert influence on the platoon. Even in their frustration, the Marines could sense her mastery. Her movements were deliberate but subtle, demonstrating control without needing words. The range, previously filled with chaos, seemed to pause around her. She was a quiet eye in a storm, and everyone felt it. She took the rifle in her hands fully, checking its balance, the sight, and the weight. Each adjustment was methodical, precise. No movement was wasted, no breath hurried. She lined up her first shot, eyes narrowing slightly as she focused on the center of the target. The world seemed to slow around her. A hush fell over the range. Even the instructors stepped back slightly, almost afraid to interrupt the calm focus she had summoned. The Marines held their breath collectively, anticipating the outcome. This was more than a demonstration. It was a test of patience, control, and mastery. Then with absolute precision she exhaled and fired. The round struck dead center. A ripple of disbelief passed through the platoon. Whispers turned into murmurs. Some Marines exchanged incredulous glances. Had she just? Alina didn't react. She continued, calm and methodical, preparing for the next shot. The message was clear. The problem wasn't the weapons, the wind, or luck. The problem was discipline, focus, and control. If the platoon could internalize that, they would learn far more than by repeatedly missing shots in frustration. For the first time that morning, the Marines truly paid attention, not just to the shots, but to her process. Every micro-movement, every careful breath, every precise alignment spoke louder than any lecture or reprimand ever could. It was a demonstration of mastery, of control, of focus. The challenge that had begun as a casual, joking remark, "Maybe Burke could do better," had now transformed into a tangible lesson. The platoon was witnessing, in real time, the difference between chaos and control, frustration and mastery. As Alina prepared for the second round, the tension in the air shifted from anxiety to anticipation. Every Marine leaned forward slightly, eyes wide, absorbing every detail. The morning's failures had not been in vain. They had set the stage for something extraordinary. In that moment, the line between instructor, soldier, and observer blurred. Alina Burke had become the embodiment of skill and calm focus, and the platoon knew, deep down, that this demonstration would be remembered long after the sun had set on the range. The stage was set. The challenge was no longer theoretical. It had been made real. And in the moments that followed, history would be written in the pattern of 50 perfect shots, a lesson that would echo in the minds of every Marine present for years to come. The atmosphere on the range had shifted entirely. Gone was the chaos of missed shots and mounting frustration. In its place was an uneasy stillness, the kind that only comes when every eye is fixed on a single, unshakable presence. Sergeant Alina Burke stood at the firing line, her posture straight, shoulders squared, and eyes focused on the rifle in her hands. Her calm had transformed the energy of the platoon from scattered panic to tense curiosity, and every Marine instinctively sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Corporal Jenkins, whose voice had been the loudest of the morning, muttered under his breath, almost involuntarily, "She's too calm. This is unsettling." His words, though whispered, carried weight, for everyone on the line could hear the tension in his voice. Even the seasoned instructors, hardened by years of training, felt a subtle apprehension. The sight of Alina, so composed amidst what had been utter chaos, was enough to make anyone pause. She extended her hand slowly, deliberately, and her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Hand me that rifle." The words were simple, almost casual, yet the weight behind them was undeniable. The range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, pausing as if in anticipation. The Marines exchanged startled glances, their previous skepticism giving way to awe. None of them could deny that Alina Burke was about to show them something far beyond ordinary marksmanship. The rifle was passed to her with a mix of reverence and disbelief. Private Donovan, trembling slightly from earlier failures, hesitated before handing it over. His fingers brushed the polished wood of the stock, and he felt an almost sacred weight in her hands, as if the rifle had become an extension of her focus and skill. Alina accepted it without a word, her movements precise, deliberate, and perfectly measured. Alina adjusted the sling across her shoulder, making minute corrections to ensure perfect balance. She crouched briefly, her boots firm on the gravel, eyes narrowing slightly as she aligned the sights. She exhaled slowly, releasing any trace of tension. The discipline in her stance was almost surgical, each micro-adjustment intentional. She was no longer just a Marine. She was a demonstration of perfect precision, calm focus, and absolute control. The platoon watched in silence, some holding their breath, others leaning forward as if trying to absorb every detail. Every Marine could see, with unnerving clarity, that Alina's mastery was not the product of luck or chance. It was a result of patience, preparation, and countless hours of practice. Her breathing was steady, her eyes unwavering, and her hands held the rifle with a quiet authority that spoke louder than words ever could. Lieutenant Harris stepped back slightly, muttering to Sergeant Major Thompson, "I've seen skilled shooters before, but nothing like this. She's different." Thompson nodded grimly, his expression betraying both respect and disbelief. "Yeah, this isn't just technique, it's control, discipline, focus." Alina's first shot rang out, piercing the air with a sharp, decisive crack. The bullet struck the center of the target perfectly. A collective gasp passed through the platoon. Some Marines' jaws dropped. Others whispered incredulously to themselves, "Did she just?" The sound of that single perfect hit seemed to echo across the range, silencing the earlier chaos completely. She didn't pause. The second shot followed almost immediately, another perfect strike, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Each bullet found its mark with unerring accuracy, forming a pattern of precision that was almost hypnotic. The Marines watched in stunned disbelief, unable to look away. Every micro-movement, every careful breath, every squeeze of the trigger was executed flawlessly. Alina was not just demonstrating skill, she was teaching, showing, and inspiring simultaneously. Private Alvarez whispered to Donovan, barely audible, It's like she's in a different world. None of us could do that, not even close." Donovan nodded, eyes wide, feeling a mixture of awe and shame. He had thought he understood discipline, focus, and marksmanship, but watching Alina made him realize how far he still had to go. Even the instructors were transfixed. Sergeant Major Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "I've trained hundreds of Marines, but I've never seen anything like this." Harris muttered, "It's perfection, that's all it is." Alina continued, maintaining her rhythm, her focus unbroken by the watching eyes, the shifting tension, or the relentless pressure of expectation. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, and perfect. The rifles that had been mishandled by nervous hands now seemed to respond instinctively to her command. Every target became a canvas, and Alina was painting precision with every bullet. The Marines began to lean forward, their previous skepticism giving way to intense curiosity. Some tried to memorize every motion, hopping to replicate even a fraction of her technique. Others simply watched, unable to comprehend how one person could perform with such absolute control while they themselves struggled with panic and self-doubt. For Alina, it was more than just firing bullets. It was a demonstration of mastery over the mind as much as the body. Her breathing, her stance, her timing, and her focus all coalesced into a single, unstoppable force. The lesson was not merely about marksmanship. It was about calm under pressure, the power of observation, and the ability to control chaos through discipline. When the 50th shot was fired, the impact was almost ceremonial. 50 bullets, 50 perfect hits. The cluster of marks was so tight that some holes almost overlapped. The range was silent, the only sound the fatting echo of the last round. The Marines stared, wide-eyed, jaws slack. Some clapped slowly, unsure if applause was appropriate. Others shook their heads in disbelief, muttering quietly, I just can't believe it." Alina lowered the rifle carefully, her movements as controlled as the shots she had fired. She didn't boast. She didn't smile triumphantly. She simply stood, letting the result speak for itself. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken respect. She had done more than hit 50 perfect shots. She had shown the platoon what discipline, focus, and mastery looked like in action. Lieutenant Harris finally broke the silence. I don't even know what to say." Sergeant Major Thompson shook his head, still in awe. That was something else. That wasn't just marksmanship. That was, he trailed off, gesturing helplessly. Words failed them because what they had witnessed transcended normal skill. The Marines themselves were in various states of shock. Some whispered to each other, trying to process what they had just seen. Private Donovan muttered, She didn't just shoot, she taught us something without even saying a word." Private Alvarez nodded, still staring at the target board. "Yeah, she made us see what we're missing and how to fix it." Alina's lesson had gone far beyond the mechanics of shooting. It was a demonstration of control over one's mind, body, and environment, a lesson in leadership, humility, and precision. Every Marine understood, instinctively, that this morning would be remembered long after they left the range. As she stepped back, handing the rifle to the nearest instructor, she glanced briefly at the platoon. Her eyes were calm, yet there was a quiet intensity that left an impression on everyone present. This was not arrogance. This was mastery tempered with humility. The lesson was complete. Excellence was not achieved through panic, repetition, or force, but through preparation, observation, and control. And in that quiet, almost sacred moment, the words that would echo through the ranks for years to come. "Hand me that," no longer a casual remark. They had become a symbol of skill, discipline, and inspiration, forever etched into the memory of every Marine who had been fortunate enough to witness the demonstration. The range, which had been filled with chaos and frustration just hours before, now seemed to hold its breath. Every Marine, from the youngest recruit to the seasoned corporals, watched with awe as Sergeant Alina Burke moved with calculated precision. She had taken control of the rifle, the range, and the attention of everyone present. With every measured breath, she transformed what had been disorder into an almost hypnotic sequence of action. The rhythm of her shots was flawless, like a symphony conducted by experience and discipline. Her stance was perfect, feet planted firmly on the gravel, knees slightly bent, and shoulders aligned with the rifle. She adjusted the rifle's weight with subtle shifts, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, balancing power and stability. Her left hand cradled the stock with gentle firmness, while her right hand gripped the trigger with a tenderness that belied the deadly precision of the weapon. Every muscle in her body was engaged, every movement deliberate, as if the rifle itself had become an extension of her mind and will. The first shot struck the bullseye, the sound echoing sharply across the range. The second shot landed just below, almost touching the first, and the third perfectly overlapped the previous mark. A wave of disbelief swept through the Marines. Some whispered to each other, trying to rationalize what they were seeing. How is she doing that?" Private Alvarez muttered under his breath, wide-eyed. "It's like she can control the bullet with her mind." Alina did not pause. She exhaled slowly, aligned her sight, and squeezed the trigger again. The fourth, fifth, and sixth rounds found their marks with the same effortless precision. The sound of impact was steady, rhythmic, and almost musical. Each shot reinforced a lesson that no lecture, no reprimand could teach. Control over oneself was the key to control over the weapon. The Marines leaned forward, trying to memorize every motion, every small adjustment, every detail of her perfect form. Some unconsciously mirrored her posture, shifting their feet and straightening their shoulders, hoping that even a fraction of her focus might transfer. Corporal Jenkins, still skeptical, shook his head in disbelief. She's not just shooting, she's orchestrating this." Even the instructors were captivated. Sergeant Major Thompson muttered, "I've seen hundreds of Marines at the range, but nothing like this. It's almost artistic." Lieutenant Harris nodded, unable to take his eyes off the demonstration. "It's more than technique. It's precision, patience, control, and focus. Every microsecond matters." Alina's control was not limited to the rifle. She managed every aspect of herself: the tension in her muscles, the steadiness of her hands, the timing of her breath, and the focus of her mind. She adjusted for tiny variations in wind, the faint shimmer of heat over the targets, and even the imperceptible vibrations in the gravel beneath her boots. Nothing was left to chance. Every shot was calculated, intentional, and perfect. The Marines watched in a mix of admiration and disbelief. Private Donovan, who had struggled to hit anything earlier, whispered to Private Alvarez, I've never seen anyone do that. Not in training, not in drills. It's unreal." Alvarez nodded silently, eyes fixed on Alina as she readied another shot. "It's like she's teaching without speaking. You can feel the lesson in every movement." As she continued, the targets quickly transformed from mere sheets of metal to illustrations of mastery. Holes clustered into near-perfect patterns, each round a testament to skill, discipline, and unwavering focus. The earlier morning, filled with missed shots and frustration, seemed like a distant memory. The chaos had been replaced with awe, tension, and an almost reverential silence. Alina maintained her rhythm, moving seamlessly from one shot to the next. She didn't rush, she didn't falter. The earlier mistakes of the platoon seemed to guide her demonstration. Each misfire had highlighted a principle she now embodied: the necessity of steady breathing, precise alignment, and controlled movement. Every Marine watching could see, in real time, the contrast between panic-driven chaos and deliberate, focused mastery. The psychological impact on the platoon was profound. Young recruits, who had been cursing their own incompetence, began to internalize a new understanding. They realized that marksmanship was more than pointing a rifle at a target. It was about patience, discipline, and the integration of mind and body. Each shot Alina fired silently communicated lessons about calm, control, and self-mastery that no verbal instruction could match. Even Marines who prided themselves on their previous training began to adjust their own stances subtly, unconsciously learning from the example before them. Corporal Simmons, who had struggled with recoil earlier, straightened his shoulders and adjusted his grip, whispering, I think I see it now." Private Mitchell, still trembling from the morning's failures, focused on his breathing and slowly mirrored the deliberate pause Alina took before each shot. The lesson was spreading, quietly but powerfully. The pace of Alina's demonstration was mesmerizing. Each round was deliberate, methodical, and flawless. She fired with a rhythm that seemed almost like choreography, each movement flowing into the next. Even the instructors were unable to look away. Sergeant Major Thompson, typically impatient with prolonged demonstrations, muttered, This is a masterclass in motion." Lieutenant Harris nodded, his face reflecting the awe of witnessing pure, unadulterated skill. The repetition of perfect shots created a hypnotic effect. Marines who had struggled earlier found themselves captivated by the beauty of precision, the discipline behind each movement, and the quiet authority of a leader who didn't need to shout to command attention. Every shot reinforced a lesson. Mastery was born from patience, preparation, and the ability to control oneself even under pressure. Alina continued, firing round after round, her calm focus unbroken by the heat, the tension, or the collective gaze of dozens of Marines. Her body and mind worked in seamless harmony, translating years of training into visible results. The rifle in her hands was no longer a weapon. It was an extension of her will, her experience, and her meticulous attention to detail. By the midpoint of the demonstration, the Marines had stopped murmuring, stopped fidgeting, and stopped doubting. Their eyes were wide, their attention fixed, and their understanding beginning to shift. They were witnessing the embodiment of excellence. They were seeing firsthand the difference between casual competence and true mastery. The wind blew gently, the sun shimmered on the targets, and the range seemed to exist solely for this moment. Alina's perfect rhythm, her steady breathing, and her unwavering focus had transformed the morning. What had started as chaos and frustration was now a lesson in control, patience, and precision. Every Marine understood, even if only subconsciously, that they were witnessing a rare display of skill that few would ever see. As Alina prepared for the final sequence of shots, a sense of anticipation rippled through the platoon. They knew that what they were about to see would be remembered, retold, and revered. Each shot, each pause, each deliberate movement reinforced the quiet but undeniable truth. Mastery was not an accident. It was earned through discipline, patience, and the ability to control oneself in the midst of chaos. In the eyes of the platoon, Alina Burke had become more than a sergeant. She had become a symbol of precision, calm, and unwavering focus. And with each shot she fired, the Marines realized that true skill was as much about the mind as it was about the weapon. The morning sun climbed high, casting sharp shadows across the training range. What had begun as a chaotic and frustrating session now held an almost sacred quiet. Sergeant Alina Burke stood at the firing line, rifle poised with deliberate perfection. The earlier cacophony of missed shots, muttered curses, and flustered instructors had transformed into reverent silence. Every Marine in the platoon had shifted from skepticism to disbelief, their attention captured completely by the woman who had taken control of the rifle and the entire range. The first 49 rounds had already struck the targets with extraordinary precision. Each shot landed closer to the center, forming clusters of near-perfect alignment. The Marines, who had been failing spectacularly only hours before, watched in stunned silence. Eyes widened, jaws slackened, and even the instructors' usual composed expressions gave way to visible awe. Sergeant Major Thompson muttered under his breath, "I've seen skill, but this is something else." Lieutenant Harris could only nod, unable to find words adequate to describe what he was witnessing. Alina's breathing remained steady, controlled, as though she were completely unaware of the hundreds of eyes fixed on her every move. Her focus was absolute. Every minor adjustment, the tilt of her shoulders, the angle of her wrists, the placement of her feet, was executed with meticulous precision. She aligned the rifle with the sights, calculated the distance, and accounted for environmental variables as if they were part of an invisible equation she alone could see. Private Donovan, still trembling slightly from earlier failures, whispered to Private Alvarez, she's human, right? That's perfect." Alvarez shook his head wide-eyed. "I don't know, I've never seen anything like it. It's like the rifle obeys her." Alina's calm presence magnified the tension of the moment. The first 49 rounds had already formed a near-perfect cluster, but it was the 50th shot, the final demonstration, that would transform mere skill into legend. The Marines held their breath collectively. No one dared speak, and even the wind seemed to pause, as if it too recognized the gravity of the moment. The rifle felt lighter in her hands now, though only because every motion was deliberate and precise. She exhaled slowly, letting her mind clear completely. The chaos and noise of earlier hours were distant memories, replaced by absolute clarity. Every second of prior failure, every frustrated shout, Every missed shot had prepared the platoon for this moment. Alina was about to show them not just skill, but the culmination of focus, discipline, and mental mastery. The Marines could feel it. Their own tension mirrored hers. Private Mitchell, who had struggled so badly that morning, gripped his own rifle unconsciously, as if watching Alina's concentration had altered his own understanding of control. Corporal Jenkins, usually the loudest and most skeptical of the group, was silent, leaning forward, eyes glued to the demonstration. For the first time that day, every Marine was fully present, fully attentive, and fully inspired. Alina aligned the rifle with the final target. Her movements were measured, deliberate, almost ritualistic. She adjusted the sling slightly, shifted her weight just enough, and exhaled with perfect timing. She raised the rifle, checked her alignment one last time, and focused entirely on the center of the target. In that instant, the world seemed to narrow down to a single point, a single bullet, and a single perfect moment of execution. The trigger compressed under her finger with deliberate pressure. The round fired, striking dead center with a sharp, satisfying crack. The 50th bullet had landed exactly where it was intended, perfectly aligned with the previous 49. The cluster of impacts was so tight that some almost overlapped, a visual testament to unparalleled skill. A collective gasp echoed across the range. The Marines were frozen, mouths agape, eyes wide with disbelief. Private Alvarez whispered, I can't even comprehend that." Donovan's hands were trembling slightly as he muttered, She didn't just hit it, she destroyed it with precision." The reality of what they had witnessed began to sink in. This was no ordinary marksmanship. This was mastery in its purest form. Sergeant Major Thompson shook his head slowly, muttering in awe, 50 rounds, 50 perfect hits. I've never seen anything like it. That was absolute perfection. Lieutenant Harris's face mirrored the sentiment. Awe, respect, and a quiet understanding that this moment would be remembered for years. It's unreal, he whispered. Alina lowered the rifle slowly, deliberately. Her expression remained calm, composed, almost serene. She did not smile, did not boast, and did not speak. She allowed the results to speak for themselves. The perfect 50 shots had transformed the range, the platoon, and even the instructors' understanding of what could be achieved through focus, discipline, and control. The Marines stared at the target board, unable to look away. The series of 50 perfect shots formed a pattern that seemed almost symbolic, a visual representation of mastery, and the result of unwavering focus. They realized that Alina's demonstration had not only proven her skill, but had also illustrated what could be achieved when chaos, frustration, and doubt were replaced with discipline, preparation, and mental clarity. Private Mitchell's voice trembled as he whispered, that was more than shooting. That was a lesson in everything." Private Alvarez nodded slowly, adding, "It's like she taught us how to control ourselves, not just the rifle." Even the instructors, who had witnessed countless demonstrations of skill over the years, could not conceal their astonishment. Sergeant Major Thompson said, "I've been in this corps for decades, I've trained hundreds of Marines, and I have never seen anything like this. This isn't just marksmanship, this is mastery." Lieutenant Harris could only nod, unable to find words sufficient to capture the magnitude of the demonstration. For the platoon, the lesson was profound. They had struggled for hours, missing shots, fumbling with their rifles, and succumbing to panic and frustration. Yet now, in the span of a few minutes, Alina had transformed the experience into an unforgettable demonstration of skill, patience, and focus. Her actions had shown that mastery was not achieved through luck or brute force, but through observation, preparation, and control over both mind and body. The transformation in the platoon was visible. Recruits who had been embarrassed and frustrated now stood a little straighter, some silently adjusting their posture and grip, trying to emulate the precision they had just witnessed. The older Marines, seasoned and experienced, nodded quietly, absorbing the subtle lessons embedded in every micro-movement, every deliberate breath, every perfectly timed trigger squeeze. The silence on the range was broken only by quiet whispers of astonishment as the reality of the perfect 50 began to settle in. Even Sergeant Major Thompson, usually outspoken, remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the cluster of shots that represented a level of excellence few had ever achieved. Lieutenant Harris finally exhaled, muttering, That was perfect. Absolutely perfect." Alina lowered the rifle completely, her calm composure unshaken. She stepped back slightly, allowing the Marines and instructors to absorb the full weight of what they had witnessed. She had not only completed 50 perfect shots, she had transformed the chaos of the morning into a masterclass in focus, discipline, and control. The lesson extended beyond marksmanship. Every Marine understood, whether consciously or subconsciously, that Alina Burke had demonstrated more than skill with a rifle. She had shown the power of observation, the importance of patience, and the value of maintaining control under pressure. She had taught them, without words, that mastery was the result of preparation, focus, and mental clarity. As the last echoes of gunfire faded across the range, a sense of awe settled over the platoon. The perfect 50 was more than a numerical achievement. It was a demonstration of excellence, a lesson in leadership, and a symbol of what could be achieved when chaos was met with calm, deliberate action. For years to come, the story of Alina Burke's perfect 50 would be remembered. Recruits would hear it in awe, seasoned Marines would recount it with respect, and new generations would strive to emulate the quiet mastery that had transformed an ordinary morning at the range into something legendary. The range was quiet now, a reverent silence hanging over the platoon. 50 perfect rounds had been fired, leaving an almost hypnotic cluster of impacts on the target boards. The chaos and frustration of the morning had been replaced by awe, and the Marines were still processing the sheer magnitude of what they had witnessed. Sergeant Alina Burke, however, did not linger in self-congratulation. Her focus had already shifted from demonstrating mastery to teaching the lesson embedded within it. She understood that true leadership and skill were meaningless if they could not be shared and internalized. Alina stepped forward, rifle still in hand, and surveyed the platoon. The younger recruits, some still wide-eyed, some trembling from disbelief, watched her every movement. Even the seasoned Marines, who had long considered themselves proficient, now looked at her with a mixture of respect and humility. Alina did not smile or boast. She did not emphasize her accomplishment. Instead, she allowed her presence to convey the lesson. Mastery was not about ego, recognition, or applause. It was about discipline, control, and the quiet commitment to excellence. "Everyone pay attention," she began, her voice calm but carrying authority. "What you saw just now wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was preparation, observation, and control. Every missed shot you fired earlier, it wasn't a failure. It was an opportunity. You were shown in real time what happens when your mind and body are out of sync." The Marines listened intently. Private Alvarez, still processing the perfect 50, whispered to Donovan, She's not scolding us, she's teaching us." Donovan nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Alina. "Yeah, she's showing us how to think, not just how to shoot." Alina moved down the line, observing each Marine individually. She crouched slightly to examine the grip of one recruit, adjusted the stance of another, and gently demonstrated the correct way to align the rifle. Her teaching was subtle but impactful. She didn't belittle anyone for their earlier mistakes. Instead, she highlighted the specific ways they could improve, using her demonstration as the foundation. Corporal Jenkins, who had spent most of the morning venting frustration, looked skeptical. "So, you want us to do it your way?" he asked, his tone cautious. Alina shook her head slowly. "No, I want you to understand the principles. Each of you will have your own style, your own rhythm. But the foundation, the focus, the control, the discipline must be the same. You cannot achieve precision without mastering yourself first." She moved to the targets and pointed out the impact clusters, explaining in detail the micro-adjustments that made each shot perfect. "See here," she said, gesturing toward the tight grouping. This is what happens when your stance, breathing, and trigger control are in harmony. Notice the spacing, the alignment. Every movement is deliberate. Every breath is controlled. This is what you must aim for, not just hitting the target, but controlling yourself while doing it. The platoon absorbed her words in silence, the lesson sinking in more deeply than any previous lecture or drill. Private Mitchell, who had struggled most of the morning, felt a surge of determination. He realized that the mistakes he had made weren't evidence of failure. They were steps on the path to improvement. He straightened his back and adjusted his grip, trying to internalize Alina's silent example. Alina continued to move along the line, demonstrating how minor adjustments could make dramatic differences in accuracy. She emphasized patience, control, and observation, showing that mastery was not about rushing or brute force, but about understanding every component of the process. Her teaching was meticulous, detailed, and rooted in empathy. She knew the struggles of the Marines because she had seen them firsthand. Even the instructors, who had long prided themselves on their own expertise, took note. Lieutenant Harris muttered, "She's teaching without ego. It's incredible. She doesn't need to assert dominance, she just demonstrates and guides." Sergeant Major Thompson nodded. "That's rare. Most instructors would have turned this into a spectacle of authority. She's turning it into a lesson, and the platoon is learning far more because of it." As the lesson progressed, the Marines began to internalize the principles Alina had demonstrated. They adjusted their stances, practiced controlled breathing, and focused on aligning their sights deliberately. For the first time that morning, the line of Marines moved with intention rather than panic. Mistakes still occurred, but they were smaller, more calculated, and accompanied by conscious correction rather than frustration. Alina's presence encouraged a culture of learning rather than fear. She emphasized that mastery was a journey, not a destination. Every misfire was an opportunity to observe, adjust, and improve. Every adjustment was a step closer to control, and every Marine, young or old, experienced the transformation firsthand, guided by her calm, unwavering example. Private Alvarez, inspired by her approach, finally spoke up. "Sergeant Burke, I think I understand now. It's not just about hitting the target, it's about controlling yourself while you do it." Alina nodded slightly, her expression softening. "Exactly. Focus on yourself first. Master the fundamentals. The results will follow naturally. Precision is a byproduct of control, not the other way around." Even the most frustrated Marines began to see progress. Corporal Simmons, who had struggled with recoil and flinching, gradually steadied his aim. Each shot was more deliberate than the last, informed by the principles Alina had just demonstrated. The earlier panic was replaced by confidence, a sense that improvement was not only possible, but inevitable with focus and discipline. Alina's lesson extended beyond the range. The principles of observation, patience, and controlled execution were applicable to every aspect of their training and even their daily lives. The perfect 50 shots were a metaphor, illustrating that skill without control was meaningless, and that mastery was achieved through consistent attention, preparation, and self-discipline. As the session drew to a close, Alina stepped back and surveyed the platoon. The transformation was evident. What had been a chaotic, frustrated group was now composed of Marines actively engaged in learning, practicing, and internalizing the lesson. They were no longer intimidated by the rifle or the targets. They had seen what was possible when preparation and focus were applied with discipline. Sergeant Major Thompson finally broke the silence, clapping his hands softly. "All right, I think we all just witnessed something extraordinary. This isn't just marksmanship, it's a lesson in leadership, discipline, and mastery. Well done, Sergeant Burke." Lieutenant Harris echoed the sentiment. "Absolutely. The platoon will carry this lesson forward, and it will change the way they approach everything." Alina lowered the rifle one final time, her expression calm, almost serene. She had not sought recognition or praise. Her goal had been to teach, to inspire, and to demonstrate the power of focus and discipline. The perfect 50 shots had served as the foundation, but the lesson had extended far beyond marksmanship. The Marines left the range that day transformed, carrying with them not just the memory of an incredible display of skill, but a deep understanding of the principles that made such mastery possible. They had witnessed excellence without ego, leadership without force, and skill without arrogance. And in that quiet, powerful way, Alina Burke had reshaped the morning, the platoon, and the way each Marine thought about focus, discipline, and control. The morning sun had shifted in the sky, casting long, warm shadows over the training range. What had begun as a chaotic, frustrating session was now etched into the minds of every Marine present. Sergeant Alina Burke had fired 50 perfect shots, transforming a routine training exercise into a lesson in mastery, discipline, and focus. But the most profound impact was not in the holes left in the targets. It was in the lessons she had silently, and sometimes quietly, taught each Marine about themselves, their potential, and the essence of control under pressure. As the platoon filed off the range, the mood was subdued but energized. There was a quiet reverence in the way they carried themselves. Even the younger recruits, who had started the morning trembling and self-conscious, moved with a newfound confidence. They had witnessed something rare, something that transcended the mechanics of marksmanship, the demonstration of what true mastery looked like. Private Donovan, who had struggled most of the morning, lingered a few steps behind the group. His eyes kept returning to the cluster of perfect shots. He whispered to Private Alvarez, "It's not just about shooting, it's about how she controlled herself. Every step, every breath, it was perfect." Alvarez nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson sink deep. I think I understand what she means by focus. It's more than aiming, it's how you command your own mind." Sergeant Major Thompson watched the platoon with a subtle smile. He had seen many demonstrations in his career, but few had the lasting impact that Alina's had. She had not just displayed skill, she had taught a principle. "This is a rare thing," he muttered to Lieutenant Harris. "It's one thing to teach technique, another to inspire mastery. She did both, and without ego. That's leadership." Alina moved quietly behind the platoon, observing their reactions. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was enough to reinforce the lesson. She understood that mastery without ego, discipline without arrogance, and skill without selfishness were qualities that could leave a profound mark on those who witnessed them. Her actions had planted seeds of confidence, focus, and self-discipline that would grow far beyond the training range. Over the next few weeks, the effects of Alina's demonstration became evident. Marines who had struggled with confidence began to approach drills with a different mindset. Private Mitchell, once hesitant and easily flustered, now approached each exercise deliberately, focusing on his breathing and stance. Corporal Jenkins, previously skeptical of anyone else's abilities, began to mentor younger recruits, sharing lessons he had internalized from observing Alina. The perfect 50 shots had sparked a cultural shift within the platoon, a subtle but powerful change in attitude, approach, and respect for the craft. The instructors noticed the transformation too. Lieutenant Harris implemented new practices that emphasized patience, observation, and controlled execution. Sergeant Major Thompson integrated Alina's principles into leadership discussions, highlighting the importance of teaching through example rather than through authority alone. The impact of her demonstration rippled outward, affecting not just the platoon but the larger training culture. Even months later, Marines would recall that morning in vivid detail. It became a story told to new recruits, a legend that illustrated the importance of focus, preparation, and self-control. "Remember the perfect 50, instructors would say, and understand that it's not the weapon, it's the person behind it. Young Marines listened in awe, trying to internalize the principles embedded in the story. They may not have been able to replicate every shot perfectly, but they carried forward the lessons of discipline, patience, and mastery that Alina had imparted. Alina herself never claimed credit or sought recognition. She returned to her duties quietly, focusing on mentoring, training, and leading by example. Yet her legacy was unmistakable. Every Marine she had taught, Every recruit she had inspired carried a part of her demonstration forward. They understood that excellence was not about ego or immediate results. It was about preparation, control, and persistence. The story of her perfect 50 shots became a symbol. It represented what was possible when a person mastered not just their skills, but their mind and body. It demonstrated that leadership could be quiet, subtle, and profoundly effective. And it reminded every Marine that the difference between failure and success often lay not in the external tools or circumstances, but in the internal control of one's own focus, discipline, and composure. Years later, veterans of that platoon would recount the day Alina Burke fired the perfect 50. They described the hush that fell over the range, the awe in the eyes of their peers, and the lessons learned from her example. It was a story not of arrogance or showmanship, but of quiet mastery. They spoke of her calm demeanor, her precise movements, and the way she transformed chaos into order with nothing more than focus, patience, and self-discipline. For many, that day became a touchstone in their careers. It shaped how they approached training, how they led their own teams, and how they viewed the relationship between skill and control. Alina's demonstration had proven a fundamental truth, that excellence, when combined with humility and focus, could inspire others to reach heights they had never imagined possible. The perfect 50 was no longer just a number. It was a metaphor, a lesson, and a lasting inspiration. Every hole in the target was a reminder that preparation, patience, and control could turn even the most chaotic circumstances into moments of triumph. And for every Marine who had witnessed it, the lesson endured. True mastery was achieved not through force, speed, or ego, but through focus, discipline, and unwavering attention to detail. As the platoon moved on to new training exercises, new challenges, and new missions, the memory of that day remained with them. Alina Burke's perfect 50 became a standard against which they measured their own progress, a story they retold to emphasize the importance of control and patience. And in every Marine who remembered that morning, a part of her lesson lived on, quiet, persistent, and profoundly transformative. In the end, the legacy of the perfect shot was not in the bullets or the targets. It was in the minds, habits, and attitudes of the Marines who had been fortunate enough to witness it. It was a lesson in leadership, a demonstration of skill, and a reminder that excellence could inspire change far beyond the moment in which it occurred. Alina Burke had fired 50 bullets, yes, but she had also fired a lesson into the hearts of every Marine present, a lesson that would endure far longer than any single training session or target could last. And so the legend lived on, not just as a story of marksmanship, but as a story of discipline, focus, humility, and the power of teaching without ego. Every Marine who recalled that morning carried a piece of that lesson forward, shaping the culture, the training, and the expectations of all who would follow. The perfect 50 became more than a feat. It became a benchmark, a symbol, and a legacy that would never fade.